when you do look back at it, or when you do have a little bit more time to evaluate down the road, I think you realize that some of the adversity that our team went through was one of the reasons why we were able to have success at the end of the year. And I think it really helped to drive our culture. So the first time probably in a few years, we feel like we've got some pieces in place that understand how important it is to come to the rink with the right attitude every day, to come to the rink ready to work and compete, and play for each other. And we had a lot of great older players on our team this year, and we had some great younger guys that were made of the same cloth, that where they believed in a lot of the same things. So we'd like to still be playing right now, but I think we did make some good strides this year.
You talk about the culture. I'm curious, though, about how you keep that culture going. The nature of the American Hockey League, players move around. There's obviously going to be some opportunities for guys to move to Calgary, potentially in battle for jobs there. How do you keep this culture that you've established that you like right now going into next season?
Well, there are going to be some guys back. That's kind of up in the air in regards to what they do over the summer and how they come into camp in Calgary ready to play, and if they can earn themselves a job. But there are going to be some guys that are back, and I think when a group has a little bit of success, they realize how hard you have to play to get yourself, one, into the playoffs, and two, to win some games in the playoffs against good teams. You don't forget that. So these learning experiences, I think, are invaluable for everybody that was a part of this, and a lot of those guys will be back next year. Yeah, it's true, in the American League you lose people. Some guys make the National League team, some guys will sign contracts with other teams, but I think the people that were here are going to be able to help our staff drive things forward.
When you look back at the season as a whole, was there any guys that kind of stood out to you that really made strides over the course of the season? I mean, it's kind of probably obvious to pick Mark Jankowski, but apart from your leading scorer, was there any younger guys that you looked at and said, these are guys that are really carrying our team?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because I don't want to, one, leave a guy out, and two, I thought we had a lot of guys that made some good progress this year. Whether they were a first-year player like Andrew Mangiapane, I thought he developed along the way, became a better player by the end of the year, or a guy like Morgan Klimchuk, where relatively unknown before this season started in regards to playing professional hockey, to where he ended up the year. So, you know, there's people like that. Of course, their contributions were important, but I even go to a guy like Tyler Wotherspoon. He's not necessarily considered a young guy anymore, even though he is still young, but he had a remarkable year. Came back from a disappointing year, probably in his mind, and probably for what we expected of him, to becoming a very important member this year. And a lot of that had to do with him and his mindset when he came back. So there's a lot of guys that I was proud of, a lot of guys that I was happy with. And that's all part of culture. Again, you don't win, or you don't make strides if your room's full of bad people. And the one thing I can say is we had a really good dressing room this year, which made it a lot of fun to be around, and unfortunately we're not still playing.
How do you evaluate some of the guys that maybe you and the Calgary staff go forward and talk about, hey, this guy might be NHL ready? Do you do that kind of stuff right now and through the off season? Yeah,
that's part of your job at the end. You have to take your notes, you come together with your notes on what you liked and didn't like about certain players, how their development came along, where we see them next year, if we think they're NHL players or if they need more time to develop. That's all part of a process, and then we give our feedback and our thoughts on players, and then it moves on up the chain, and the guys in Calgary have to decide whether or not they think a guy is close to being ready, or if they need more time. And that's stuff that goes on over the course of the summer, a lot of conversations about it. Eventually you get into development camp, and eventually you get into main camp, and a lot of it comes back to the determination that the player has, and the mindset the player has in regards to where they want to be. And that comes down to really how bad you want it, and what they're willing to do over the course of the summer to put themselves in a position to have success.
Part of being an American Hockey League coach isn't necessarily just winning. It's also developing players and moving them on to the National Hockey League. This year, you had 4 players that made their NHL debuts, 9 players that were called up to the Calgary Flames. A little bit less than last year, but that probably has something to do with the health situation. Calgary pretty healthy over the course of the season, but when you look back at it, are those kinds of numbers that you look at and are pretty proud of for you and your staff?
Yeah, I mean, I like the way our young guys came along, and whether or not we had a lot of guys or few guys get called up, part of our job, as you said, is development and trying to get the most out of guys. But I've used the culture word a few times, that part of bringing people along is learning how to win and what it takes to win. And I think that's one of the reasons why you saw a lot of strides from a lot of young guys this year, guys that offensively carried our team. The Marks Jankowskis, the Mangiapanis, the Klimchuks, guys that had success. That's really what it becomes all about. They learn how to win and the importance of those pressure situations and how they have to raise and elevate their level, and that just makes them better players down the road and hopefully puts them in a position where they can compete for a job in Calgary.
Well, some of these players are on American Hockey League contracts, and they'll be looking for an opportunity over the course of the offseason, whether it be here or elsewhere. But you also had a few players that were on NHL contracts who, on the younger side of their careers, trying to get an NHL contract. And in particular, we saw Ryan Lomberg get his NHL contract. We have Cale Detzel, who certainly was a big contributor over the course of the season. These guys that you have over the course of the year, how do you evaluate those guys in particular to try and help them do what they want to do, which is get in the NHL?
Well, we evaluate them the same way as anybody else that comes into our group, whether you're a one-way NHL contracted guy or if you're a call-up from the East Coast League. We evaluate them the same way. Ryan, in his situation, is a great story, a lot like Garnet Hathaway was a few years back. He earned his contract, and I think when people see him around the room, they have an appreciation for what he went through. Now, Cale is the similar type situation, as you mentioned, was a very valuable member of our team, wants an NHL contract, and I think he gave us everything he had. And, we as a staff here are hopeful that we have him back, because he is a great young man, a good player and a better person. But that all kind of gets decided here over the next couple of months. But I think guys like that are great examples for people that are kind of wondering where they fit in, wanting to be an NHL player, but having to prove to a lot of people that, I can prove you wrong. If people don't believe me now, they'll believe in me after this year. And that's why I love stories like that. They're those feel-good stories where guys, they fight through all that adversity and they eventually get what they want. So the door's open now for a guy like Ryan. Now it's what he does with it.
You continually talk about culture right now, and the culture really is established a lot by the veteran presence that you have in the locker room. And when you look at your veteran nucleus that you had, it wasn't just one or two guys. I mean, there were 6 or 7 guys that had a lot of NHL experience, a lot of AHL experience, that were able to bring guys along and show them the ropes on and off the ice. And one guy in particular that I think was an interesting story was Brandon Bollig. As a guy who comes down, could have easily been sulking that he's not in the NHL, but he ends up being one of the probably best pros you had all along, and really was someone that I think not only proved that he is an excellent hockey player, but he's also an excellent veteran leader and still has something to prove in this game of hockey.
He sure does, and he deserves a lot of credit. We often talk about Angelidis, we often talk about Keith Ollie, Koska, Fratton. Those are guys we often mention, and Bulls sometimes never got the same press or notoriety as those other guys, but when he's been in the NHL for a significant period of time, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do to come down here, but his mindset was right when he came down, and right from our first meeting with him, he wanted to be a guy that showed people what they had to do to get to the next level, and he told us his practices will be as hard as they've ever been. He would prepare for games and play as hard as he would ever be, or as he ever could, and he was going to be a great teammate, and he held his bargain up in all those categories. So he was excellent for our room in a lot of different ways. Sometimes you wonder if a physical guy in the NHL is going to come down and try to play a skilled game and maybe get away from what makes him successful, but he didn't at all. He was hard to play against. He was a miserable guy at times on the ice, and was a real important factor in our room.
And obviously you see him come up big with some big blocks in the playoffs. We saw Mike Angelidis do that. Is it one of those things, going back to that whole culture thing, that you're seeing guys that have won big trophies in American Hockey League and in the National Hockey League go out and do things on the ice where now a younger player says to themselves, hey, if this guy done it and he's won a Stanley Cup, he's won a Calder Cup, I should be doing this as well if I want to compete at the top level.
Yeah, that's 100%. That's leadership. And when you have guys in the lineup like the older players that we've mentioned, they do it every day because they know that's what a hockey player has to do if they want to have success, not just as an individual but as a team. And the great part about our group is they knew how to hold the younger guys accountable the right way without making them feel like they've been ostracized or uncomfortable. They do it the right way, and I think because of the way Mike and his leaders handled some of our players, everybody felt like it was something that they could do towards the end of the year, and I really felt like we were this close to moving on and doing a little bit more damage along the way. You just would have liked to have that opportunity, I guess.
Well, Coach, obviously we know how much there's going to be a lot of hockey going on in the summer, but there's also going to be a little bit of time away from the game where you spend a little time with your family, maybe go on a couple vacations. Anything fun planned over the course of the summer?
Too early for that yet. I know we're going to, similar to what we did last year, there's a lot of things around this area that we haven't had a chance to see yet. So we're going to be, I guess you can say, local tourists and try to get ourselves around to the different spots that we haven't hit yet. And I think the other thing that we enjoy doing are going to baseball games. So whether that's the ports across the street into Oakland or San Fran, or even maybe make a California road trip, you know, to the southern part of California and see the other teams play as well would be pretty cool, that I think we would enjoy. But I think it's going to be fairly relaxed and laid back, and let my kids finish school and then spend a little bit of time with our family.